I'm gonna start this the same way I started the last video. Before I start, let's just say, what the hell? 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 What in tarnation? The performance of the last video was definitely something I did not expect. So thank you to everyone who took time to watch it, and to everyone who commented, left some thoughts, and shared their favorite games. Thank you, genuinely. I know 1.4 thousand isn't a lot in the grand scheme of YouTube, but that's probably my best performing video yet. And I have a bunch of video ideas in my Notion for you guys, so if you guys like my content, which is pretty random, since I just talk about whatever I find interesting, consider subscribing and liking and leaving a comment. My analytics tell me a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so yeah, a lot of you also aren't Filipino, which is pretty weird because the entire history of me uploading to YouTube, most of the people that watch me are Filipinos. But anyways, I've noticed a sort of discrimination, if you will, amongst people I meet, where they'll quickly judge a person, good or bad, depending on their financial status. And I got a little curious and sat with my thoughts on it for a while, and even did a little bit of research, and if you can call it research, but I'll be talking mainly about my experience with this judgment and what I think the best course of action is. Last thing before we get into it, this is a touchy subject, so if you have any thoughts or arguments, please do leave them in the comments. I'll try to reply to every single one, and of course I am open to different opinions and perspectives, so let's get started. Growing up, I always felt like there's this obvious divide between two types of origin stories, if you will, and this felt a bit more apparent once I got into high school, college, and even just in general public spaces when I graduated. And it might also be because of the fact that I was a very oblivious kid. It might have been just as prominent back then, I just didn't notice. But anyways, in the Philippines, you are either burgis or a young stunner. It feels a little cringe to say it, but these are the words that people use, at least to my knowledge. But basically, burgis is, the sheltered, nice, rich family experience. Yoga, Starbucks, Fords, iPhones, and MacBooks, owning a house inside of a gated community. That type of person. And a young stunner is street food, street basketball, public transport, rented apartment, and cherry mobile. If you know, you know. And this obvious tax bracket divide is pretty universally understood, right? I think everyone in the world knows what I'm talking about, but I'll be talking about this topic in terms of how I view and experience it. I vaguely remember not really caring about this back then. Being a kid, nothing else really mattered other than cartoons and video games. But as I was growing up, I started getting more aware of how people viewed and treated me. Right now, with the people that I meet and the conversations I have, I mostly feel like I'm not burgis enough for some people, but also not young stunner enough for others. Still feels a little weird to say, not gonna lie. And as I briefly touched on the last video that I made, I was partially raised by YouTube, and most of the content that I consumed when I was a kid was English content. And not to brag, but I feel like I was a pretty fluent English speaker for my age, and for someone, of course, who lived in a household where Filipino was the primary language. It was because of all of these people that I got so good at English at a very young age. I bring up my English fluency because of one very important aspect of the Filipino culture. Super brief history lesson, I promise this matters, okay? The Philippines was invaded and colonized by the Americans back in 1899, and they sort of governed us up until they granted our independence by 1946. This era shaped the Filipino perspective on the Western culture and lifestyle.
Masaklap aminin, pero totoo eh. Meron talaga tayong colonial mentality deeply ingrained with us.
And as time went on, at this point, anything American was looked up by Filipinos, whether we like to admit it or not. And American products became a social status. If you wore American clothes, ate American food, drank American coffee, you were above the average Filipino. And of course, language was not exempted from that rule. Just to be clear, I don't like this. I don't like that Filipinos are like this. I spoke English a lot, and I watched a lot of YouTube playthroughs back then, and of course, as a kid, I would imitate them whenever I would play as well. Granted, I was still very fluent with my native tongue, since I spoke to everyone else in Filipino, and I'd like to think that I was never konyo. And for those unaware, konyo is a person, or I guess an accent, where Filipinos would primarily speak English but sneak in some Filipino words for convenience. And konyo also had this weird Valley girl accent.
Oh my gosh. Ang inat. Yaya.
Tumaksyon po
You get
ako.
the payo.
Kuya, yeah. Hindi po ba makikita? I always make daan here.
He's
Yeah.
been really into
So,
soccer
yun po.
since he was
This is so hard to explain to someone who isn't Filipino, but a big chunk of my viewers aren't Filipino, apparently. This is for you guys. Going back, due to my fluency in English, people in school treated me weird. It was okay though, because I always had friends that were like me in some ways and they would understand. Once I graduated, I started feeling the other side of this. There would be times where I would be with people and they'd want to eat at a certain place, but I usually would not be in my typical range of budget. And at first, I would still spend money and try to pretend and eat with them because I didn't want to embarrass myself. But I got to a point where I just go with them and sit with them while they eat, or like buy something cheaper and eat with them. It was only when I got a steady job where I got to eat at these absurdly priced places. Granted, I do want to, and the food is usually really good. I like to try out random places every now and then, usually with my girlfriend. But now, I tell you all of this just to explain to you that I am privileged, but it never felt like it was enough, because I was privileged enough to get made fun of by non-privileged people, but not privileged enough to get in with the rich kids. The internet and people as a whole really enjoy punching up, and it's easy to make fun of people who are more fortunate than us because in a way we're making fun of ourselves. It feels so prevalent here in Filipino culture that going to a certain university gave you this status symbol, sort of like a badge of how high up the tax bracket you and your family were. Man, Filipinos and university tagging is a whole can of worms that I don't want to bother opening up in this video. By the way, I just made that term up, university tagging, but I'll be using it throughout this video because it's convenient. You guys know what it means. So there are a bunch of well-known universities here in the Philippines. Some well-known ones are usually where the richer side of the country studies. Schools like De La Salle, Ateneo, UST, and some would argue UP. And UP, for people who don't know, is supposed to be a representation of accessible, high-end education for everyone. More specifically, the lesser fortunate ones. But a lot of Filipinos feel weird with how high the margin of rich people who get to take up slots in the school. And I thought this problem was just a current thing, but apparently it has been a problem since way back then. I will say it has gotten better now, but Filipino social media still really do enjoy clowning on rich people. And I personally mainly see it on TikTok and Facebook. And to all non-Filipino or Philippine residing people watching, yes, Facebook is still a huge thing here. Terms like konyo, burgis, bonjing, nepo baby are usually used to make fun of these people. And usually for being out of touch, like not knowing how to commute or thinking a 200 peso meal is a budget meal for a student. And the same goes for the people on the lower end of the tax bracket spectrum. I studied at PUP, often called the poor man's UP. I saw this on Reddit and it's really sad. And I personally have experienced people treating me differently just because of the school I went to. And I'm just really lucky to have a good paying job to be able to experience a lot of the things that I didn't get to do before. I do wonder if something similar is a problem for other countries as well, you know, the whole university tagging thing. And I assume this sort of human behavior is universal, but you know, that's my assumption. If you're someone from a different country, please do confirm or deny this. The way I see it, both ends of the spectrum have their own bullies, and for both cases, it's usually for comedy, and if it's in good taste, I don't really mind it. But different people have different ways of handling playful insults. But obviously, punching down on the lesser fortunate for the sake of hurting someone is absurdly evil, but I would argue that punching up is just as bad. For some of these rich kids, they genuinely don't know better. They don't know how much public transport costs because their parents already gave them a car early on in their life, and they think a 200 peso budget meal is good for a student because they probably got 1,000 pesos budget every day for school. It is so easy to make fun of these people because we feel bitter about the fact that they don't have to go through the things that we had to go through. And it especially boils my blood when some kid online says that the train is an easy hack on getting through Metro Manila's hellish traffic problem. To be fair, I don't think it has to be this way. I do think even with our differences, there is a way for us to still see eye to eye. As I've mentioned, or I guess maybe loomed over, I think, I sit in the middle of this spectrum, and I don't want to take the moral high ground here. I am not exempted from these sins. I've made my fair share of unsavory jokes towards someone's lavish or unfortunate upbringing, but I can say that I have been labeled with and by both ends. And I think I may have found the solution, maybe. I have seen, at least online, Filipinos unanimously appreciating certain people even if they were raised rich. And it's just one word: self-awareness. Or is that two words? I'm not very sure. Personally, I'm a pretty sensitive guy, and I am well aware of that, and I do try my best to handle jokes properly if they're over the line for me or not. And what I've noticed is that people seem to understand me better whenever I just accept whatever label they give me, because it's usually the case. They think I'm weird for suggesting to commute, or for saying that Marugame Udon is a place to eat if I'm watching my budget. I've been treated as a rich kid and as not. Apparently, there's levels to this. You know that thing with rich people where they don't like that people around them call them and see them as rich?
We're finally here.
Dang, your house is huge.
What house?
The one behind you.
Oh, this one?
Yes.
Nah, I meant my parents own this whole neighborhood. Like, this is my guest house right here.
Oh my gosh, this is so nice.
I mean, it's cool. It's nothing crazy.
Man, you're rich.
Bro, I'm not rich.
Don't call me that. I hate when people call me that. I'm upper middle class. Do you understand me?
Man, all these houses cost like $1 million, bro.
Just because my parents pay like $20 million for this neighborhood does not make me rich. All we eat is steak and lobster every day. I hate it. I just want some McDonald's once in a while. If anything, you're more rich than me.
Man, I live in an apartment.
Exactly, bro. We only own like 3 apartment complexes.
I believe this is exactly the type of attitude that give people the ick. People like self-awareness. They respect it. You take pride in what you have, your experiences, and you fully admit that there are just some things that you are not. You don't know what dying tastes like, and you don't have a Starbucks card. It's fine. LARPing as someone you're not will either emotionally or financially drain you. You have to own your upbringing. If they laugh, it is what it is. What matters is that you're willing to learn and to understand. One last thing I want to bring up before closing this video out is that I am fully aware that there's a lot more discrimination towards the less fortunate. Quick story. I was on a tricycle once and I sat next to this random, probably mid-30s lady, and she was carrying a lot of goods, which I assumed she was gonna be selling. And then she struck up a conversation with me and about how she came from poverty and homelessness and how she worked hard to get out of that situation. And then she told me that one of her greatest achievements is that the guards at SM Mega Mall let her in. Now, I believe that it's pretty universal that malls and a lot of establishments don't let homeless people in. And it was wild to think about, sort of like an eye-opener, that something so simple for me, going inside of a mall, is someone else's great achievement. Please be kind to people around you. It's a tough world. Thanks for sticking around until the end. My last video was about video games and this one is about privilege, so I'm not sure how this is gonna compare performance-wise, but if you do have any thoughts or arguments, ideas, please leave them down in the comments. I am very excited to see and hear what your guys' thoughts are. And again, it would have been really easy for me to just make another video about video games, but you know, I just want to do this my way and just speak about stuff that I like to talk about, and it just so happens that this is the topic that I wanted to talk about. If you stayed, my gratitude is immense. Thank you very much for sticking out and have a great day. Be kind. Mwah. Love you all.